Good morning, everyone. For Telesur, I'm Cody Weddle in Caracas, Venezuela. In Honduras, indigenous and Afro-descendant communities are denouncing government actions aimed at removing them from their land. For how they plan to resist the government's plans, here's Gerardo Torres.
Last year in Honduras, the government closed the office responsible for the protection of the rights of indigenous and Afro-descendant groups. Berta Cáceres is the leader of the National Indigenous Committee, COPIN. She believes that there is a political and economic intention behind the state's action to deny these groups their rights.
We saw it in Rio Blanco with the Lenca people, and also in the case of the Garifunas. The Honduran government denies their existence. It's the equivalent of killing indigenous and black communities. We reject their folklore. It's not our culture. We have spirituality, art, knowledge, wisdom, our own education and a wealth of knowledge, and that has been rejected by this system that is racist, capitalist, patriarchal and violent.
In Honduras, there are 8 indigenous groups: Talenca, Chortiz, Garifuna, Isleños, Tahuacas, Tulupan, Peche, and Misquito. But the state has begun to give concessions to foreign companies to exploit the national resources in the ancestral lands.
There is a special relationship between the land and indigenous and Afro-descendant populations. I think that the authorities should begin to read the international resolution to then understand that any measure that they take against the communities could mean international responsibility for the state.
Thompson was invited to Honduras by the Center for the Investigation and Protection of Human Rights, CIPRODE, that has begun to work with the indigenous and Afro-descendant communities to help them in the protection of the land that ancestrally has always been theirs. Gerardo Torres, Telesur, Central America.
And to Peru now, where President Ollanta Humala has once again reshuffled ministers. As our correspondent Raul Mora reports, the reasons behind this latest shakeup remain unclear.
With continued labor rights and oil exploration protests and corruption allegations, the government of President Ollanta Humala has replaced 5 ministers. For Congressman Daniel Mora, the changes are due to pressure from opposition parties and an attempt to work with them.
The pressure by the 2 opposition parties has been fundamental for creating an equilibrium, calm, and decreasing the political tension that the country has. And working with the opposition that was not present in the dialogue have been helpful. But I think that this change in minister is not going to influence what the opposition thinks.
Ruling party spokespeople have publicly declared that with the changes, opposition forces no longer have an excuse not to engage in dialogue with the executive. Regarding social movements, some of the new ministers have already stated that they will immediately engage in dialogue with the protesters. However, representatives of the largest union conglomerate, the CGTP, held a press conference denouncing no real changes in terms of popular demands.
In effect, the government wanted to refresh its image and maybe find breathing space. This could happen, but it's not going to last for very long, and the CGTP's demands still need to be implemented. Our demand has been to change the economic minister and the minister of production, because these 2 sectors are the ones that, in practice, control the government and the minister's cabinet.
Out of the 5 new ministers, only 2 seem to bring new perspectives. One is a feminist who will be in charge of the Ministry of Women and Vulnerable Populations, and the other is a human rights specialist from the Progressive Catholic Movement who will be the Minister of Internal Affairs. The latter will be the 7th to take on such office so far for this administration, which has been characterized for record changes. Reporting from Lima, Peru for Telesur, Rael Mora.
Torrential rains and floods have left 25 dead and hundreds homeless in central Bolivia. The heavy seasonal rains have affected over 17,000 households since October. The central and northern regions of the country have been hardest hit. Government figures show that in Cochabamba alone, some 182 families have been affected. 91 hectares of crops damaged and 12 homes flooded. Hail has caused much of the damage. The downpours have also led to mudslides. Former Guantanamo Bay detainee David Hicks has won a challenge to overturn his terrorism conviction in a U.S. military court. An Australian citizen, Hicks pleaded guilty to providing material support for terrorism in 2007. His lawyer has long argued the plea was made under coercion after enduring years of torture and mistreatment at the hands of U.S. forces. The Australian was captured in Afghanistan in 2001 and subsequently held in Guantanamo Bay until 2007. Hicks says during his detention in the notorious prison, he was sexually abused, routinely deprived of sleep, beaten, and kept in solitary confinement for almost 24 hours a day.
All right, so I'm sure no one is surprised by today's long-awaited acknowledgement by the government of the United States of America of my innocence. Even the Australian government has admitted that I had committed no crime. It's just unfortunate that because of politics, I was subjected to 5.5 years of physical and psychological torture that I will now live with always.
Protesters in the U.S. gathered outside the White House on Wednesday denouncing the current summit against extremism sponsored by President Barack Obama. Protesters condemned the event and the fact that Muslim social organizations weren't invited. Several Muslim protesters say they feel persecuted and threatened because of their religion. They add that private media have only contributed to increased hate against their culture. Spain's two largest trade union protesters also gathered yesterday against the newly enacted gag law. The measure criminalizes unauthorized protests outside public buildings or taking photos or videos of police officers. Violators can face fines of up to $900,000. Protesters also gathered for the government to recall Article 315.3 of the Penal Code that prohibits labor strikes and establishes prison sentences. And in the United States, an explosion rocked an ExxonMobil refinery in California yesterday. The blast occurred in a processing unit and led to a ground fire, which was quickly extinguished by firefighters. The local fire department and refinery employees are currently performing air monitoring tests in the area, but have yet to detect harmful emissions. The cause of the blast remains unknown. 4 workers were left with minor injuries. And finally, Beijing welcomed the Lunar New Year, the Year of the Goat, with the centenary tradition of ringing 108 bells at midnight. Beginning in the Dezhong Temple, the Buddhist tradition is said to remove 108 worries and bring good luck. The goat is said to bring peace and tranquility. Millions of people from the Chinese diaspora have traveled to the country for the festivities. It marks one of the largest travel events in the world. 20 more on those stories and others at our website. Check it out, telesurtv.net/English for Telesur English. I'm Cody Weddle. Have a great Thursday.